Hello and welcome to Health Confidential, where I demystify health and all that impacts it. I'm your host, Simone Gisondi, author, holistic health and life transformation consultant, certified holistic cancer practitioner, and overall health enthusiast. I dive deep into the fascinating world of health with each show, touching on the mindset, diet, and lifestyle required for superior health. Each episode features in depth conversations with health experts, thought leaders, as well as personal stories and experiences that will bring the world of health to life. Whether you're a curious newcomer or a passionate health enthusiast like I am, come with me on a journey of discovery and enlightenment. Tune in every week and join me as I demystify all things that touch health. Thank you, everybody, for tuning back into Health Confidential. Today, I have one of the most prolific figures in the world of cancer and especially holistic cancer, and that is Dr. Valter Longo coming out of California. He is a world renowned expert in longevity, fasting, and nutrition. And if you don't know him, I don't know how you wouldn't, especially if you've ever been afflicted with cancer or have anybody in your family afflicted with cancer. He's best known for his intense research on fasting mimicking diets, metabolic health, and their impact on aging and chronic diseases, including, of course, cancer. For those of you that have studied him, like I have, his pro longevity nutrition strategies are backed by extensive research, much of which was done by him in particular. And of course, how fasting and specific dietary interventions can enhance cellular repair and, of course, regeneration and how to get the body back in balance to reduce inflammation and improve metabolic flexibility. Dr. Longo is also the author of The Longevity Diet and his work at USC Longevity Institute, as well as the Institute of Molecular Oncology in Italy in Milan. And that has been groundbreaking in the field of nutritional interventions for lifespan extension and disease prevention. A huge thank you and a shout out to Avery Books for gifting me a copy of his latest book, which is right here, Fasting Cancer. I highly, highly recommend everybody go and pick up a copy. Make this be your Bible if you are afflicted with cancer or if anybody in your family is afflicted with cancer. Dr. Longo, thank you so much for joining me on my show. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction.
Yes. So I know that, of course, you hail from the beautiful Genoa in Italy. I have family there, so thank you so much for joining me. And your interest in health and longevity from the research that I've done on you has led you to shift focus from other things that you were obviously focused on at the time. And you earned your PhD in biochemistry from the University of California, Los Angeles, so UCLA, and you studied under Joan Valentine, Dr. Joan Valentine. I want to start with everything that you have authored. So back in 2018, in your book, The Longevity Diet, you said that nutrition is clearly the most important factor that you can take control of to affect how long you live. And then you moved on and you authored with some pediatric nutritionists in Italy, La longevità inizia da bambini, which of course translates to longevity starts in childhood. And then you actually, when you authored the Fasting Cancer book, it was initially released in Italy before being released here to the North American market. Thank you for all the work that you've done. And of course, I want to start the conversation by asking, and of course, I know that your work has influenced countless individuals, myself included. My father was afflicted with cancer twice. And of course, the work that you've brought to us has been very influential for me to be able to help him seek healthier, of course, alternatives to just going down the traditional routes. But why should our listeners pay attention to the concepts that we're going to be discussing today that, of course, are in your book, Fasting Cancer?
Yes, I always I give lots of talks all over the world
Mm-hmm.
and even in some of the top universities of the world. And I always challenge everybody to come up with something that would be more powerful in terms of genetic changes and gene expression changes, more powerful than fasting and long-term fasting particularly. And I've been doing this challenge for 20 years, and nobody so far even came up with a possible alternative, right? Not only nobody challenged it, but nobody said, well, if we gave people this cocktail of drugs, maybe that could change as many things as fasting changes. And nobody's ever done that, right? So this is how powerful fasting and fasting mimicking diets are. They change everything, right? And why? Well, because the human body is, as long as food is around, as one type of, let's say, biochemistry and metabolism. And when food is not around, then it has to completely change. So all of a sudden, the fat, and mostly the fat stored in the visceral area, becomes the fuel source, and that requires a completely different set of genetic pathways. And so this is why I think that it's difficult to imagine. I mean, this is why it's so powerful, and this is why once you learn how to apply it, then it can be. I mean, of course, it can be powerful in your favor, or it can be powerful against you if you misapply it, and we can talk about that. But cancer is one of the most obvious ways to use it, because normal cells know exactly what to do in response to fasting, and cancer cells refuse to do the right thing in response to fasting, right? So for cancer, it's a particularly clear-cut reason to use it, right? That you're going to get all normal cells in a very coordinated way, and all cancer cells in a very uncoordinated way, to go in opposite directions.
So on page 8, because I've had an opportunity to read the book, you say that each cancer has a molecular weakness, and all cancers require lots of nutrients to grow, but they also continue to change. And for this reason, fighting cancer with only one or a few drugs is like fighting a war by employing only the infantry. I love that. And we need to fight tactically, by thinking differently about the problem. While cancer can be attacked frontally with chemotherapy or radiation, we also need the immune system to attack the cancer cells, all the while ensuring minimal damage to the normal cells and organs of the body. How do we do that?
Yeah, so exactly, right? So you list a very complex, so you have to protect the normal cells.
That's
You
right.
have to go after the cancer cell, weaken them, but that's not enough. Then you need something else, and that something else usually is what's been studied for decades. Let's say chemotherapy, radiotherapy, immunotherapy, kinase inhibitor, hormone therapy. So we see it working best using all the people that have done great work in finding, hey, I can kill this particular, let's say, colorectal cancer cell best with chemotherapy drug, right? Or best with this kinase inhibitor. So when we combine with what everybody else has done, and then all of a sudden they generate synergism, meaning they work better than the sum of the two, right? And so in many animal studies, we see, let's say, normally chemotherapy does a little bit, but not very much. Fasting mimicking diet does a little bit, but not very much. Then you put it together, and you see the mice become cancer free, right? So it's going after cancer cells no matter where they are, right? So yeah, this is the first generation. Second generation of studies, now we go after what we call starvation escape pathways. And so then when the cancer rewires, I mean, if you fast a cancer patient or mouse, the cancer cells will rewire, and when they rewire, because they're trying to stay alive, right? So something is missing. If the glucose is missing, or certain factors or certain amino acids are missing, the cancer needs to find another way to stay alive. And so now, because of technology, we can quickly identify what the other way is, right? And so once we identify, then we can treat that with a blocker, like a FDA approved drug that is already existing. And so now, I mean, we have a way, we're starting to have a technology that will allow us to go after any cancer. I mean, it's still early, and so, maybe it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but now we have a technology to go after all cancers, hopefully in a very effective way.
Yes, and I saw that in the book you talk a lot about gynecological cancers. And of course, in the line of work that I do with holistic cancer therapies, I have a lot of women coming to me with questions about those cervical cancer, ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer. Um, would you say that the fasting mimicking diet would be efficacious irrespective of the type of cancer where it's found in the body?
Yeah, now, so we've been talking about mice, right? But there are now 20, I think 20 or so clinical trials, right? Human clinical trials
Yes.
that have been completed, right? With fasting or fasting mimicking diets, maybe more than 20 if you think about fasting.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I would say that it looks very, very promising. Like, for example, for triple negative breast cancer, the Vernieri group in a small study, but but very promising. They showed almost a doubling of overall survival when the fasting mimicking diet was combined with chemotherapy versus chemotherapy alone, right? So
Hmm.
I think that we need to be respectful of the rules, and the rules are the rules. So we cannot claim that this works in human cancers. And so the way we've been looking at it is, of course, first you got to talk to your oncologist about fasting mimicking diet. And
Hmm.
then you probably want to ask questions, and questions should be, how effective is the therapy that you're giving me right now, right? So if the oncologist says, they say in the case of, um, somebody stage one that has a 98% chance of being cured,
Of course.
we usually say probably we have foundation clinics, and in the foundation clinics, someone like that may say, we may say, do the longevity diet and do the time restricted eating. So eat for 10 hours a day, fast for 14 hours a day, and then do this pescatarian longevity diet that is described in my first book. And
Hmm.
don't do the fasting vegan diet, right? Then as they have lots of side effects that are unbearable, or they have now metastatic stage 3 or 4 cancer, which the oncologist says, um, this we don't really have much of an option here. Things are not working, or things are not expected to work very well. That's when the fasting making diet, I think, should be considered. Now, sorry for the long answer, but back to your question, we've seen it working with all cancers, right? We've seen it working with
Amazing.
gynecological, the breast, colorectal, liver, brain, lung. Yeah,
Wow.
by we, I don't mean me anymore. I mean lots of universities and groups, right? So yeah, so it's a fundamental property of cancer cells. They just are heavily mutated, heavily confused. We think of cancer as being smart, but cancer is very dumb. It just knows how to do a couple of things, and that's it. So as soon as you confuse their environment, you change their environment, they're not as sophisticated as normal cells. They just struggle with complex environments, right? So that's what that's really why it works so well with so many cancers, because we make their environment very different from what they're used to, right? And now they have to find other ways to deal with it, as we mentioned earlier, but those are no longer available, right? So for example, mitochondrial respiration, the way the making of energy, the most cancer cells that have something called Warburg effect, and they change that. They're no longer as good at using the normal energy powerhouse of the cell. So if you push them to use it again, and that's damage, what we see in a lot of cancers, they start killing themselves by trying desperately to use it, and then eventually that causes a lot of free radical production, and they essentially commit suicide.
Are you talking about, when you're saying the Warburg effect, are you talking about the introduction of oxygen to the cancer cells so that they actually no longer rely on anaerobic ways of, I guess, surviving?
Well, they actually start relying more on anaerobic, right? So they start relying
Yes.
more on glycolysis and glycolytic energy production, and so they can, and usually in that process they utilize more glucose, and they utilize more one or more amino acids, right? And so and this is why fastings in different cancers may utilize a different amino acid, right? So proteins are made of amino acids, and some cancers may be dependent on glutamine, another cancer on another amino acid, right? So in fasting, it doesn't necessarily decrease all amino acids. Some amino acids
Right.
are increased by fasting, but I
Yeah.
mean, in general, again, it changes so many of different nutrients available, macronutrients available, that it makes it very difficult for the cancer to keep doing this Warburg effect, this fast glycolytic. So it needs to go back to the mitochondria, and because mitochondria makes more ATP, makes more energy compared to this glycolytic flux. So with less energy, it makes more energy, right? So with less nutrients available, it can make more energy or sufficient energy. But the glycolytic, then you need much more sugar, much more amino acids to stay alive.
Right. So on page 9 of your book, you say, while we have learned that you cannot starve cancer cells with fasting alone, since cancer cells steal from other cells and find a way to stay alive, which is exactly what you're just referring to, and they do so even if the patient fasts, you can use fasting mimicking diets to make the cancer cells so weak or so desperate that the right therapy will kill them. So
Yeah, and
that's
so I always gives the analogy of the desert, right? And so I say, you put a million people in the desert, and if you only fast them, but you keep them in the shade and sitting, they're probably going to be okay, right?
right.
But if you fast them, you make them run, and you keep them under the sun, nobody's going to be alive in 2 weeks, right? Zero, right? Even a billion people, I say, is it possible that out of a billion people will be dead? Yes, right? They will all be dead. It's almost impossible for them to survive the sun, the running, and the no water. Say no water running under the sun, right? Impossible for 2 weeks, right?
Hmm.
But yet, if you put them in the shade with water and not running, they could go for months, a couple of months, and almost all of them would be alive, right? So I think that yeah. So that's those are the type of knowledge that we have to consider as we are using this type of strategies. And this is why we want to use it with the chemotherapy, with the immunotherapy, and lots of other, sophisticated or somewhat sophisticated therapies that they will only work very well, at least in animal models, when you combine them with the fasting mimicking diet.
Yeah, so these are the fundamental principles behind the fasting mimicking diet. And this is how I guess it differs from traditional fasting because a lot of people just go into traditional fasting, so they withhold any kind of nutrient. Thereby, they also starve normal cells of nutrients.
Well, I mean, I think that unfortunately, the world is divided in the
Yes,
conservative view, right? And the alternative view, right? And so the conservatives will say, I don't want to hear fasting, I don't want to hear nutrition, I don't want to hear you just chemo or whatever the standard of care
that's
is,
right.
nothing else, right? Eat candy if you want, right? That's a conservative. And then the alternative is like, I'm not gonna do chemo, I'm gonna fast, right? And yeah, so that's unfortunate, right? Because I think cancer is an ugly disease and you gotta use it all, right? And that's why you have to know the mechanism, you have to understand lots of things, so that you time everything correctly and you do everything in a way that it makes it very difficult for the cancer cell to survive, but makes it very healthy for the patient, right? So this is why the fasting making diet, and this is why the combination with now immunotherapy, let's say. So we're moving away from chemotherapy and into, for example, vitamin C plus fasting mimicking diet. So two anti-aging intervention now having an incredible effect,
Amazing.
devastating effect on lots of different cancers, right? So yeah, that's what we're saying. If you know the science well, you can take two things that are completely innocuous, that people will take it for the fun of it.
Hmm.
Now, very little or no damage to normal cell and devastating effect against cancer cells, right? But you need high level vitamin C, So you need injection of vitamin C. This is not just taking a bunch of pills. It doesn't get enough vitamin C in the system. But a fairly still enough people. A lot of people do vitamin C infusion
Yeah.
for rejuvenating purposes, right? I don't know that really does that, but people do it without having cancer, right? So this is why we're pushing very hard. We're having a difficult time because we have to be respectful of the rules of the FDA. And
Mhm.
so these things that, but hopefully, the FDA moves in a adds a direction. I mean, or at least a component to it that will have a much more flexible. I mean, they have something called compassionate use, right? But
Yes.
I think they need to expand that, so that the oncologists together with scientists can come up with something that's much more rapid especially if the patient is advanced stage cancer patient, is much more rapid and much more science-based. Because right now, whenever we say, well, maybe vitamin C and FMD will work very well with this type of cancer, but that's nobody can do that, right? Nobody can combine FMD and vitamin C to treat cancer. And so the patient is really not allowed to do it, particularly if if it involves an injection of the vitamin C. And yeah, so then they don't do it.
How important would you say that nutritional habits are when somebody is on a journey of trying to heal their cancer? Because in the medical community, and I'm speaking from the perspective of the people that I've worked with, as well as my father who had gone through it twice, it's very medical heavy. So, chemotherapy, radiation, surgical interventions, and so on and so forth. And the nutritional habits are actually left out. You are literally the only person that I knew of that was actually talking about nutrition when it comes to cancer, which is how I stumbled upon your work when I was doing the research so that I could help my father out. And I wanted to know from your perspective, doing the incredible amount of research and studies that you've done, how important have you seen that nutritional habits are in people when they are going down the journey of healing their cancers?
Yeah, so I mean, we still don't have conclusive evidence. I mean, we have conclusive evidence for mice, but we don't have conclusive evidence for people. Also because there's tens of many cancers and even more therapies, right? So it's in the cancer field. This is why I was saying I think we need the FDA to come up with something that is much faster, right? Much faster. And because if you think about, if you had a new idea, right? And even though you have extensive preclinical and even clinical data, it's very difficult to move that to FDA approval, hundreds of millions of dollars. And
Yeah.
then you have to work with the standard of care, which might change by the time you're finished with your trial. Let's say that I want to, add fasting mimicking diet to hormone therapy, right? And so we actually put 11 hospitals together in the United States and Europe, some of the best hospitals, Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic and UCSF and lots of universities, hospital. So now we were going to test the fasting mimicking diet plus palbociclib and plus fulvestrant, right? The standard of care for breast cancer, for hormone ER positive breast cancer. And but then we were talking to clinicians that were saying, well, if you get to, it's going to take you years to finish your trial, like fasting mimicking diet, palbociclib, fulvestrant. If in the middle of that somebody changes the standard of care, you can throw away all your data. You got to start over, right?
Oh,
So now
no.
imagine that. Now imagine, we don't have $200 million in the first place. And so we're lucky, and we didn't get it so far. If we get $20 million from the NIH to do that trial. But then you get to it, the middle of it, and you have to stop it because the standard of care changes, and you have to start over, right, with the new standard of care. So yeah, so the system is set up to make it very difficult to test this. So unfortunately, the answer is we don't know, right? We don't know how effective. So we have triple negative breast cancer. Vernier has done a great work in having multiple trials, all showing very positive effects. And he just published another one on what's called complete pathological response, which almost doubled when patients use chemotherapy plus the fasting-mimicking diet compared to the database, what you expect in this very aggressive triple negative cancer. But for everything else, there's a lot of initial trials out there, for prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, but or initial data, clinical data, but not enough to be able to say, "Oh, this works for you, and this will work for you." This is why the statement I made earlier, hey, go with the standard of care, and then when things are not working, talk to your oncologist about hey, this fasting mimicking diet is working very well in the mouse models, and there's 20 trials that have already been done, so it's very safe. So far, we have very few reports of grade 3, 4 toxicity caused by the fasting mimicking diet. So yeah, then once you're at that point, talk to your oncologist and see if that's something that you want to try.
In integrative medicine, everybody has embraced the idea of having some sort of a structured diet to be able to at least enhance and strengthen the immune system so that it can do its job to help any traditional therapies people do. I don't know if you remember, Dr. Longo, but when I first started, and this is the reason why I even asked the previous question, when I started researching your work, I actually stumbled upon this interview with a female judge. I believe she was out on the West Coast in California. And she actually combined your fast mimicking diet. She was actually undergoing traditional therapy, such as chemotherapy and radiation at the time. And she said that it was the most amazing thing that she had undergone. She was obviously, like, all of her markers had gone down, and she was progressing so well towards her healing. And so she was combining your diet with the cancer therapy that she was undergoing at the time. This goes back quite a few years, but that's what gave me hope. And I decided to sort of integrate everything that you are teaching with my father, who is good and alive and doing great right now.
Very,
Because
very
I,
happy with that.
yes, thank you. Because I really wanted, I mean, at the end of the day, eating is something we do every day. It might as well be good, nutritionally dense, so that it can actually help our health and our immune system and our tissues that are not affected by the cancer. And at the same time, if we can actually make the traditional therapy that we are using for the cancer itself be more efficacious, then of course, like, it only makes sense that you would combine the two. I don't know if you have any recollection, but of this case with the female judge, and if you can share any insights. But she spoke so highly of your methods.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have a lot of cases in the book, in the new book, Fasting Cancer. So maybe like at least 20, right?
Yes,
Including probably the one that you're talking about. Yeah, so I think the cases are very important because I think that they give a face to some
that's right.
scientific and clinical ideas. But we made it a point to have the case and then have the mouse work and then have the human clinical trials, right? So,
Hmm.
and I think that as I was writing, I think there's 15 different oncologists that helped me write the book, including Deborah Tripathi, head of breast oncology at MD Anderson, and Joseph Lenz at head of colorectal cancer at USC. But they reminded me, they curbed my enthusiasm, right? So they reminded me like, okay, you've done some, this great animal work, unbelievable animal work. I always say in animals, fasting mimicking diet works better than immunotherapy. And we've done this for breast cancer, melanoma, I think, yeah, so several cancers for which we've tested in animal the FMD works better than the immunotherapy. But the oncologists are saying, okay, hey, slow down and keep in mind that something can look great with one or two patients, and then you do a big trial with 200 patients, and it all falls apart, right? So now, like you say, hope based on lots of data, right? Now, hope. So I think that what should come across is that, I mean, a great example is the study by Vernieri and Debro that they published. I think it was European Journal of Cancer, in which they did 100 people clinical trial, right, with fasting mimicking diet, lots of cancers. And
Mhm.
then out of that, I think about 20, and I don't quote me, but I think about 20 were stage 4 metastatic, right? So
I'd like to take a quick break now to let you know that today's show is sponsored by my book, Against Medical Advice. This book is a memoir, and it tells the story of how I built my life back after suffering a stroke during my divorce. I discuss the nutritional, lifestyle, and mindset aspects that I put into practice to regain my health and rebuild my life. The book has been a labor of love, both writing it and publishing it, and I couldn't be more proud of it. Please pick up your copy from Amazon. For your very own signed copy, my email address is simone@simonegisondi.com. Oh, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd please consider leaving a review once you've read the book. And now, back to the show.
right, so
Mm-hmm.
people that are really in trouble, right? And then they saw that 5 of those that were stage 4 metastatic, they went into remission. And
Right.
then they said 5 cases. There was, I think, colorectal, breast, pancreatic, and colorectal, breast, pancreatic, and lung, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so they publish a paper and they call it exceptional responses, right? They say, you know, this is so rare that we will see 1 and much more 5 going into remission from a stage 4, that we need to publish it. Let's just publish it and let the oncologists all over the world look at it. And yeah, so that's a good example, right? Do we know that the fasting mimicking diet did this? We're not sure, but it's very strange, right? And there's people that will otherwise be told, hey, there's not much we can do. You're stage 4, the cancer is everywhere. That's it. We're at the end of it. And so they go into remission. Now, one with colorectal cancer, the cancer came back like 3 years later, and then they did the same, and it went back into remission, right? So yeah, so I think it's powerful. I'm assuming it was caused by the fasting mimicking diet, but yeah, more work needs to be done. And then but you could, I mean, the point of the page, like you could be one of in a sense, 5 out of 20, right? That's a lot of people that were in advanced state trouble and ended up going from that to remission.
Yeah, and especially if you think of GI related cancers, of course, the gastrointestinal system is involved. And of course, the gastrointestinal system is also involved in the nutritional aspect of life and the digestion, so on and so forth. And a lot of the nutrients that we consume are what the body uses to produce hormones. And therefore, hormonally driven cancers are also very much contingent on the nutritional aspect of our life. So that's why, of course, your work is so powerful. And I understand that the research that you do would be great if the FDA would give you more latitude so that we could actually see a lot of these real life cases, much like the one that I found so much hope in with the female judge from California. But how do you envision the role of dietary interventions evolving in mainstream medical practices, particularly concerning chronic disease prevention and treatment in the future?
Yeah. And by the way, the FDA wouldn't give me power. I mean, I think you should give oncologists power to, and maybe make it a rule, right? If you need to have a scientist present, you need to
Of
have the
course.
oncologist. You need to have the consent of the patient. You need to have an informed consent. Explain to the patient what the risks are. It's like a quick clinical trial, like a
Right.
clinical trial of 1, right? That's what
Mm-hmm.
they should. Only when clearly there is not a highly effective therapy that can be used to treat that tumor.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So, but as far as I mean, I don't even. I mean, there's 2 things, right? There is prevention and then there is treatment, right? When
Right.
we're talking about treatment, I don't even think about nutrition. It's not it's got nothing to do with nutrition, right? When we talk about treatment of cancer, we're talking about using food and the lack of food as a tool to activate things that are extremely powerful, right? And way more powerful than drugs, right? Way more powerful. They're not specifically more powerful than drugs. So blocking something, the drug is going to be better than fasting. But overall, all the things that the nutrition and the fasting can do, they're much more powerful than any drug that you can think of, as we were saying earlier. So yeah, so you're thinking about treatment, it's really a very coordinated, intervention that where you have to time things, right? So say for example, with chemotherapy, usually we do 4 days of the fasting mimicking diet before and 1 day after, right? And it has to be done exactly like that. And there's lots of reason for that, right? So you want to use
Hmm.
the 4 days to drive down the glucose, the IGF-1, the insulin, lots of things. You want to weaken the cancer, and then you want to hit it with the chemotherapy. But you don't want to refeed or earlier than 24 to 48 hours after the chemo, or based on the half life of the chemo, right? So it could be if the half life is particularly long, then you have to make a different decision. But let's say most of the chemos will be gone from the system within 24 hours. And then, yeah, 24 hours later, you can start refeeding. Because if you combine the chemo with the fasting, now you could have a problem, not a solution, but a problem, right? This is why you cannot do
Right.
alternate day fasting with chemo. Bad idea, right? I mean, people, they think it's fasting, so all of it must be good. So I could do this or that. No, if you do alternate day fasting, that could actually increase the toxicity of chemotherapy against your normal cells, right? And may
Hmm.
even help the cancer cell grow. So it gets tricky. Yeah, so that's a treatment. So in treatment, we don't even look at it as nutrition. We just look at it. We're trying to make certain changes, and the only way we can do that, many changes, is with food or lack of food. Prevention is very different, right? Because prevention, yeah, then you're talking about nutrition, everyday nutrition, and what you eat and how you eat. In that case, we my recommendation has been the longevity diet for most people, and longevity diet is a personalized diet. So I think it's silly to be talking about Mediterranean diet or the Okinawa diet because if you're from the Mediterranean area, the Mediterranean diet is good for you. It may not
Of
be even
course.
optimal, by the way, because it was based on observation made by people of this area of Italy eat this way, and so everybody should eat this way. But that's not the case,
Right.
right? Somebody comes from Sweden is going to have different needs in that longevity diet, and the general concept is the same, but the type of ingredients are not going to be Mediterranean. They could be, from Northern Europe, and it may be much more beneficial to somebody from Sweden than the Mediterranean diet. Yeah. So the longevity diet is a pescatarian, so fish maybe 3-4 times a week plus vegan, low protein diet. And high nourishment, so lots of vegetable, lots of legumes, lots of um, whole grains, and but being careful not to have inflammatory ingredients that may bother you. Some people, a lot of people are bothered by nightshades, tomatoes, and legumes, and yeah, so it needs to be personalized because, and this is why the dietitians that are foundation clinics, we ask them not to give, oh, here it is, this is the diet that you should follow, but now they don't always listen to me, but in most cases, that's what they do is more listen to what the patient eats, likes to eat, is happy with, and then slowly modify that so that they can come as close as possible to a longevity diet.
Yeah. So would you say then that the longevity diet, even for prevention, would it be, would the cultural aspect be taken into account? Because, like you said, people from the Mediterranean area, of course, would probably thrive on the Mediterranean diet. However, if you're going to take somebody from, let's say, Southeast Asia or the West Indies, would they also thrive on that specific diet, given the fact that genetically they have probably evolved to thrive on things that are local
Yeah.
to their diets in their particular area? So then would the cultural aspect play a role? Is it a factor in the longevity diet?
Yeah, so yeah, that's what I was saying, right? And by the way, lots of Italians cannot eat the Mediterranean diet, right? So my father, who was from Calabria, was allergic to nuts, or
Mhm.
intolerant to nuts, right? So it's very, very common. So it's an illusion, even for Italy, because the genetic composition of an Italian or a Greek, I mean, you'll see genes from everywhere, right?
Mhm.
So some of them will be lactose tolerant and some of them will be lactose intolerant, right? And maybe sometimes you're a brother and a sister. One can be tolerant, one can be intolerant. So yeah, so I think even for somebody from, literally on the Mediterranean Sea, you'd be surprised how many things they are not comfortable with, and sometimes they don't even know, right? They might eat. So I remember when I used to go to Italy, that if you get a cappuccino, let's say in a bar, in a coffee shop,
Cafe. Mhm.
it would come with regular milk, right? And I also always thought that's really strange because I know for a fact that about half of the Italians are lactose intolerant, and yet the only option was, with a macchiato or a cappuccino is with milk. So I thought, I bet you that you now have all these people in Italy, millions potentially, they're having, maybe because you have one cappuccino a day, you're not gonna die from it, but it's gonna give you problems, right? So yeah, so now it took 20 years finally to have alternative milk types
Mhm.
and gluten free and all of that. But for the longest time, I think people in Italy just thought, hey, it's milk. It's good for me. What could be possibly wrong with a cappuccino with a little bit of milk in it? Well, a lot, right? So if you do that every day, you might just have developed some gastrointestinal disease that you will have normally not ever had, right? So yeah, that's how important it is to understand you and have a good gastroenterologist that sets it up and says, look, if for whatever reasons, these 17 things you cannot eat. And so you just avoid them, right? And yeah.
There
Now
are
it gets
such
more complicated because sometimes, like legumes, a lot of people cannot eat them, but until they're trained to eat them, right? And then if they're trained to eat it, the microbiota is generated. So it gets more complicated sometimes because you might have to trial a little bit and see if you're able to respond properly, just like with milk, right? So some
Mhm.
people can now, generate the enzymes to break down lactose, and they're okay, right? And but some people are not okay, and they just become lactose intolerant, and they just are lactose intolerant, and there's nothing you can do, right? So yeah, it gets one step even more complicated. You have to try it, push it a little bit, be careful, and then if it doesn't work, like if you try some legumes every 2 or 3 days, and 3 months later you're still, having lots of problems, then maybe the legumes are not for you.
There are so many powerful tests that, so the people that I work with, I usually send them out to do, and it's just a very simple blood test that can identify some of the things that you react to very strongly and the ones that you don't react to and are easier on the digestive system. They don't elicit that digestive distress to the degree that some other things do. And by and large, oddly enough, because you were talking about milk, dairy is one of the most prevalent ones that you see in people. And that's perhaps because past the age of breastfeeding, we no longer produce those same enzymes that we do in infancy when we can actually break down that sugar that's in milk. And of course, the milk that comes from mom is a perfect DNA match for us. So it's much easier for our system that knows because it's obviously very connected to mom's system. Um, but on that note,
But for
Dr.
example, my mom is 90 years old, right? And her dinner every night is milk, right? And she's
There
from
you go.
Calabria. She's from Calabria, right? So yeah, so she has some genes probably that allow her to be fine with the milk. And milk for an older person is very nourishing, right? So yeah, so it gets tricky, right? You have to
Yes.
each person, like in my mom, of course I follow her very closely and I allow it because I know that she's fine with it. High nourishment for her, she likes it. And so for all those, she's 90 years old, so I'm thinking perfect, go with milk. Whereas, most other people that are younger, I would say, yeah, maybe just, don't overdo it with dairy products. Yeah.
Yes, and I know that in your book, in the Fasting Cancer, the latest book that you have out now, there's one of your case studies there where you speak of, I believe that the lady that you have in there is 117 years old, and she was the oldest living person at the time of her
Yeah.
death. And you were talking about her diet and how she was drinking grappa, which is amazing. That was part of her daily intake. And of course, she got to make it to 117. I have somebody in my family. He's
No, Emma
90.
Moreno didn't drink grappa. There was somebody else that drank grappa. It was another case. But Emma yeah, she ate like three
Red
eggs a
meat.
day, and
Yep.
yeah. So she was not. She did not have a healthy diet at all. But I mean, yeah, the grappa was somebody else. But
Okay.
yeah, somebody else that moved into a nursing home, and they I don't know if she got to 103 and they told her to stop drinking grappa.
Yes.
She was too old. And then of course she died right after she stopped drinking.
After she started
Uh,
stopped
so
drinking the grappa.
yeah, yeah.
I have somebody in my family, some Barese from the southern part of Italy as well. Um, 90 years old, had already gone through stomach cancer, but even post that was drinking red wine with every meal in the evening, which was very cultural to him. This is how he sort of developed, in like those were his nutritional habits and dietary habits back in Italy, going strong. I know that there's a lot of talk out there now that says, no alcohol is safe. And yet, this individual, so I just wanted to highlight how what you said is that it has to be prescribed to the person. Therefore, it's important to do the necessary tests to be able to identify what actually works for you as the biochemical, unique individual that you are, so that you can actually be able to take in the nutrients and whatever is necessary for you to be able to thrive and for your body to be able to express health in the most effective way.
Yeah, and regarding the no alcohol is safe, that's not what the data shows, right?
Mhm.
So the data shows, and this was also a discussion I had with the people at the Harvard School of Public Health. The data shows that yes, the up to, let's say, 3 or 4 drinks a week, there is overall neutral effects of that
Mhm.
in longevity and health span, right? There are minor effects on few different cancers, but overall is a neutral effect, right? So if you think about the population overall, that recommendation of not drinking is if somebody's made happy by the drinking and they keep it to less than 3 or 4 a week, there is really no data that would suggest that they're going to live shorter with more disease. Now they might have more cancer, right? But they may have less cardiovascular disease, right? So you cannot say to somebody
Yes.
if they enjoy it, that makes no sense to be in the cancer silos and say, well, because it increases, I think, breast cancer risk by 6%, and it increases esophageal cancer. Don't drink because you may get cancer. Yeah, that's true. But overall, if you drink up to, let's say, 3 or 4 drinks a week, you're gonna live about the same, and some data will indicate even a little bit more, right? So I mean, not data, I'm talking about meta-analysis, right? So meta-analysis would suggest that there's a slight advantage to very low, like moderate to low drinking. And yeah, so I was always very surprised about the reasoning out there that alcohol is poison. Alcohol is not poison. Excess alcohol is poison. But like you say, we've seen. I've never met a centenarian that didn't drink, right?
Hmm.
At least for decades of their lives, right? Men and women. So yeah, so I think that this idea of poison is bad. Now, if you have risk factor for a particular cancer, let's say breast cancer, yeah, you don't want to combine now alcohol and a high risk for or breast cancer or any of the cancers for which alcohol is a risk factor, right?
Right.
That's what we always say. That, yeah, if you already have another family reason for a certain cancer and the alcohol is also a risk factor for that, then don't drink at all. I think in that case, it's a good idea.
Yeah, there isn't a catch all or overarching, let's say, umbrella kind of statement that you can make for everybody across the board because it is very, and I see what you're saying about the alcohol. You see a lot of people that come, they're experts in their respective fields, such as, let's say, brain health, and they come and they say, no, alcohol is good. Whenever you consume alcohol, this and this and this happens. But they do discount exactly what you said, that it could be beneficial for other systems in the body and other mechanisms that the body has. But they just kind of focus on the idea of the brain because they're coming from their own, expertise.
But that's
And
all.
they,
That's all the strategy. You can't do that anymore, right?
yes,
You have to
yes,
be aware of family history and lots of other things, and then you have to say, in the absence of understanding that you have a particular problem in the family, then
mm-hmm.
yeah, drinking up to 3 or 4 glasses a week, especially if it's red wine, perfectly fine. And yeah, so I think that's a sophisticated recommendation versus the oh, don't drink ever because this could increase your chance of developing breast cancer by 6%.
Yeah, so it's more of a holistic look at the whole aspect of the person, their family history, their prevalence, I guess, to a specific cancer, how their genes are going to express their other nutritional habits, lifestyle habits. So it's you have to take the whole person into account. Now, Dr. Longo, what future research directions are you most excited about in the realm of nutrition, cancer, aging, longevity? Because I know that you're at the forefront of all of this.
I mean, of course, we have many, many different projects, but I think for cancer, we're very excited. We're getting closer and closer to,
Yes.
methods where we can go after any cancer very rapidly, very personalized treatment. And so I think it's not as easy as it seems to implement it, as I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully, we get some help from the FDA and they start thinking, maybe having some expanded, m- methodologies or ways to treat patients that don't necessarily they're careful and but they don't necessarily require FDA approval as long as the drugs used are FDA approved, right? So I think that I mean there's something like that already, I hope that they put something in place that makes it a lot easier to have this, the type of work that we do, let's say vitamin C plus fasting mimicking diet plus chemotherapy. It makes no sense that we will have to tell the patient now, no matter what, even if you're about to die, you can't do it, right? So it's because nobody wants to touch it, right?
Right.
So we have all this data that works so well in animal models and it's safe. Why can't we use it, right? So I hope that happens because if that doesn't happen, then we're back to $200 million of FDA approval. The pharmaceutical company cost per patient is around $200,000 per patient uh,
Wow.
to get FDA approval, right? So imagine you do the calculation, 200,000 per patient. Usually you need about 1,000 patients to get something approved.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
you see how it's
That's a
just
lot.
an impossible task for anybody that is not a big pharmaceutical company.
Mm-hmm. Do you see the fasting mimicking diet remain a staple in the research that you are going to continue to do as we see the evolution of cancers and the evolution even of our own systems and the evolution of the way that diseases express in our bodies vis-a-vis what's happening in the world and of course the stressor factors and the multitude of things that the body has to put up with?
Yeah, I mean, all of that makes the FMD even more important, right? Because it really is activating the body's ability to deal with lots of problems,
That's
right? So,
right.
we published a few months ago we already had published on the pancreas. We damaged the pancreas of a mouse, and then we start the fasting-mimicking diet, and the pancreas goes back to its normal function. We damaged the kidney of a rat, and it just completely unable to function. And then we start the FMD cycles, and it's able to restore its normal function by do reprogramming, activating stem cells, etc. So yeah, so I think that no matter where the damage comes from, whether it's a toxin or it's a disease, it's a metabolic disease, the fasting mimicking diet, I mean, and in some cases, the fasting, but just water only fasting is extremely difficult for people to do and not that safe. So I think that in all these cases, it seems like that moment, that 5 day, or let's say 4 to 7 days, depending on the problem, is able to recognize the problem and activate the body's ability to fix it, right? Yeah, that's why I think it's so sophisticated, and people don't realize it because, again, people think of it as, oh, it's nutrition, what could possibly do fasting? What can it do to you? Well, that's not it, right? There's billions of years of programs that have evolved to essentially shrink organisms, use in the shrinking moment, use the self component as food, right? So autophagy, and then in the most important part is not the shrinking, the autophagy, but it's the re-expansion. In the re-expansion, you use stem cell, you use reprogramming, you just use intracellular rebuilding to do that, right? So that's why it's going to take a while before things that are more powerful than fasting, refeeding, if applied correctly.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the staples for the audience? What are some of the staple foods that are part of your protocol when you put together the fasting mimicking diet?
Yeah, the fasting-mimicking diet, and we met with the FDA, and the FDA wanted to make it even more narrow, right? So that made it difficult for us. So we stopped the discussions. But the fasting-mimicking diet should be done as tested clinically, right? So now there is 40 trials that have been done by lots of universities, and so it has to be done. So I cannot talk about commercial products, but it has to be done the way it was tested for the reason it was tested for, right? So there is one for cancer, there is one for now the one for cancer, unfortunately, is not commercially available yet. Yeah, so I mean, I recommend people can come to the Create Cures clinics and contact the Create Cures clinic, and they can help people, work with the oncologist to come up with something that is help the patient come up with something that a fasting mimicking diet type treatment plus longevity diet plus the time restricted eating plus sometimes the ketogenic diet, right? We use
Mm-hmm.
all of it in combination with standard of care. So yeah, so I think that is the near future, I hope. Yeah.
The path forward. And of course, for everybody who wants to learn more about it, please go pick up your own copy of Fasting Cancer so that you can learn about the amazing research and all the studies that Dr. Longo has done. It talks about how fasting and Nutri technology are creating a revolution in cancer prevention and treatment. So you can actually avail yourself to all the information that he has put in the book that discusses exactly how each cancer is approached and all the case studies so that you can actually see some of the faces, as Dr. Longo just said earlier, the faces behind all the work that he does out in California. Dr. Longo, is there anything else that the audience needs to know about the work that you do that they would benefit from in this realm?
No, I think we covered all of it. Yeah.
Yes. And once again, thank you so much, Dr. Longo, for your tireless work that you do. As I said, I know that it helped me tremendously when I started doing my studies, especially because it was so near and dear to my heart. Because obviously I had family members that were going through cancer, and I know that there are many out there. So just a collective thank you for the work that you do and for everything that
Thank
you're
you.
bringing, so that we can learn more about what we can do with this disease and some of the tools that we can actually take into account. And we look forward to more of your research, more of your studies, and more of your books in the near future. Thank you, Dr. Longo.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Health Confidential. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. Your support and engagement means so much to me, and I'm truly grateful for each and every one of you who takes the time to listen. If you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found value in the information, I would love it if you could please leave a review. Your feedback helps me reach more listeners and continue to bring you valuable content. And remember, you don't have to navigate your health journey alone. If you're ready to take the next step towards a healthier, more vibrant life, I would love to work with you. Whether you're looking for personalized nutrition, holistic coaching, or a comprehensive health strategy, I'm here to support you every step of the way. Visit my website at simonegisondi.com or reach out to me directly by sending me an email to simone@simonegisondi.com to learn how we can work together. Let's transform your health. Remember, health is a journey, not a destination. So stay healthy, stay curious, and keep taking those positive steps forward. Take care. I'll see you in the next episode.